Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. Strike, 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 strike. You ready to strike, Roshni?
Is this Newsies or something?
Newsies? No, it's not Newsies. It's WGA negotiating time.
Oh boy. And we haven't really talked about this since before the pandemic. I mean, we kind of have, but I don't think there's been any really big movement since before the pandemic.
I think we mentioned it a while ago that they had just put together their negotiating committee and we're going to start talking about it. And now this is what's come out of those early meetings.
Mm-hmm.
It's all in the news on the Hollywood Reporter about, they're kind of like trying to figure out what their priorities are going into negotiations. And it's kind of a long laundry list of, wants. Maybe, it's one of those things where you put a million things on the table and hope you get, some of them. But I think, from what the articles are saying, there are some pretty hardline objectives that they have going forward. And some of the stuff we've talked about before, not even in relation to, contracts and negotiations, it's just that how the industry has changed and how, the writers' contracts have not kept up to the changes in the industry.
Yeah. And I will say right now, before we get into it, I am impressed because some of it, it's like it's about time. And some of it, I'm like, good on you for the forward thinking. But let's get into what exactly they're asking for. So go ahead.
Well, the first one we've been talking about a lot, and that's regulation of writing by AI.
Oh my gosh, it's everywhere right now.
Yeah, and it's really great that the WGA is putting some effort behind at least talking about it, because I've seen stories about people who have actually lost their jobs to AI as writers.
Yeah.
Or how companies are not hiring the writers they plan to have hired because they realize now they can do that with AI.
I think right now where it stands, and again, AI is constantly evolving, BuzzFeed replaced a lot of their, I mean, I don't think they have a huge writing staff anyway, because I know they've been on the decline, but they replaced a lot of people with AI, a lot of their writers. And then Netflix was called out for using AI background art for their animation. So it's already infiltrating, not even counting things like college students using it for their essays, which of course is already happening.
And we did a whole episode on AI just a little while ago, and you can watch that again or listen to that again and get into all those gory details. But it's good that the WGA is putting it on the table to discuss it, because, literally, and we've talked about how, I think it's short-sighted to think that the studios won't try to do that, to use AI in various means, from generating story ideas to writing whole scenes or writing whole scripts. Or in your case with the novels, writing novels.
I mean, because there's no ethics around it. But the other thing that's interesting, too, is not just using AI to write scripts or novels or whatever creative things, but if they ask their people, hey, can you, input something in here? The more you feed it, you're still helping it. You know what I mean? And I know you can't stop it. Like, the technology's already out there and it's basically kind of gone rampant. But if I feed my script into it, I'm also helping it become smarter to basically write my scripts in the future.
Yeah, it's the old idea of, remember how in the big days of the layoffs, it was like, hey, Bob, sorry, but we're firing you. And here's this kid who's 20 years younger than you. Can you teach him to do your job? It's kind of like that.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Can you teach someone who will never die and doesn't need pay and doesn't need insurance?
Never getting laid off. They're never getting laid off. They're going to be there forever. Yeah, I can't wait till we have the first AI studio executive. That would be cool.
Well, I mean, would they be giving notes by committee? Can you imagine an AI committee?
Oh, that'd be horrible.
How would that work? But anyway, dystopian future.
Would the AI automatically generate conflicting notes just to screw with the writer?
Oh, wouldn't that be hilarious if like all the AI actually agreed on the notes?
Yeah, right.
That would be like the one good thing about it. You're like, oh, okay, cool.
Okay, so that's the more existential negotiating item. Getting to the more hardcore stuff, the more, kind of numbers stuff is, money. And they want to increase writer minimums for film, TV, new media. Especially, there's a lot of focus on things about the minimum number of weeks, because called and also something called span protection, and that's
Mm,
where maybe you have these short seasons of 8 or 10 episodes, but you're working on them for longer than it would normally be for those kinds of things. Like, in episodic, network television, they're cranking them out. They're like week after week after week. But
mhm.
when you're doing streaming, you have a lot more time, and sometimes they even write all the episodes before they even go into production. So they may stretch out that writing time and have you writing for, 10, 15 plus weeks on, a 10 episode season, which is, would be more than you would have spent on that if you were writing on network. So they want to figure out how to like deal with minimum number of weeks, as well as, compensation for when it takes a long time to write those longer or those shorter seasons.
I mean, that's an interesting thought, and it's not one we've ever actually brought up until you mentioned it just now, but remember, I think I've said this a while ago, with streaming is basically just mini movies. They already know the beginning, middle, and end before they even shoot it. They maybe go over, like, 6 episodes instead of, a season, is 22 weeks in broadcast. The casting directors are also film casting directors, not necessarily TV. So, streaming really functions like film, and I never did ask the question, like, are writers for streamers getting paid like it's a movie or a TV show? Because I would think that that's very different because of the time commitment.
Right. And then, well, yeah, exactly. And then it's also like if you're doing shorter seasons, you don't have as many episodes earn residuals on. So they want to increase the residuals. Like if I write, 2 episodes of a 10 season, season, rather than writing 4 or 5 episodes of a 20 something episode season, I don't have as many episodes to get residuals on.
Well, the other thing is, and this wasn't necessarily in the Hollywood Reporter article, but with broadcast, they can figure out if something is in syndication or if it's getting replayed or whatever. But with streaming, you kind of don't really know how often a show is getting viewed or how popular it is unless the streamer tells you that it's popular. You know what I mean? They haven't figured out how to quantify it.
Well,
So
they
how do you
the streamers know how to quantify it. They know exactly how many minutes of everything
Okay,
somebody's watching.
yes, but they're
It's
not
just whether or
telling
not they're telling, yeah,
everybody else.
and how
So
that's
how do
calculating.
writers how do writers quantify a streamer and go, "Hey, my show has been aired, 3 times on repeat," or whatever. Because before, remember reruns? That was the whole goal of syndication. You wanted to be in reruns, you wanted your show to play forever like Friends or whatever, but they don't it's different now because the model is different and because not everything's transparent.
Hmm. Right, and the syndication is another thing. If they're just continuing to play the show on their streaming service, they're not syndicating it, but they're replaying it a lot. So I don't know how those are
Yeah.
different. If you get paid differently for reruns, so-called reruns on the same network versus, syndication, which is off network.
So correct me if I'm wrong, is the Writers Guild just asking for more money up front for streaming writers, or are they also asking I mean, I guess because it could go one of 2 ways, like, we don't know if something's getting repeated views on a streamer, so just give us more money up front, or give us more money up front, but also let us know if a show's being you know, on repeat views. Are they asking
The
for one or
articles
the
weren't
other?
that specific, but
Okay,
they're
yeah,
asking for both. I mean, they're asking for more money on everything. They want
okay.
higher minimums. They want increased residuals. They want overall. They want larger budgets for writing shows. You have something like a Lord of the Rings, which is was it a 50 or $100 million TV show that was only 8 or 10 episodes. That's a huge budget for a TV show, but are the writers being compensated proportionally?
Mhm.
Like in film, in general, the screenwriter's fee is usually a 1.5 to 2.5% of the budget of the film. They don't do that in TV, obviously, but percentage wise, a screenwriter's fee usually scales with the budget of the film. With TV, that doesn't happen. It's usually based on the schedule of minimums and what have you, or whatever negotiated contracts for established writers what they can get, kind of thing.
Mhm. It'll be interesting to see because I know negotiations end on March 7, and then, well, not end on March 7, let me correct myself. The guild members have until the 7th to say what they want, and then the negotiations start in mid-March, and I
Yeah,
believe, May 1st, is it right? May 1st is when
the contract
the
expires, I
contract
think.
expires? Yeah, so they
Hmm.
have until May 1st
They've got
to
time.
figure things out, yeah.
Yeah. Some more money issues that go into that, in the film side is getting feature writers. They call it two-step payments. So instead of
Mhm,
getting paid, when the first draft is done or something like that, spanning those payments out a little further. So if you're working on something for a long time, you're not starving while you try to finish something. So that's one of the things. And the other thing was, and this is really interesting for how the industry is going, is standardizing the compensation for films regardless of whether they premiere on streaming or theatrically. So if a film has like this is what I was just talking about, if a film has a budget, you know, whatever the budget is, getting paid based off of that budget percentage wise, like a typical theatrical film is, even if it's just going on to streaming.
mhm.
Because otherwise, I don't, if TV films, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at the NBA to see. TV films are, have a different schedule than theatrical films, so they kind of want to make those the same.
Which I think that's totally fair because I mean, the whole idea of, like remember, like, the made-for-TV movie? Like, I
Hmm.
don't think that really exists anymore in the streaming world, and thanks to the pandemic, like, being on a streamer for your initial debut kind of counts as a theatrical release. And honestly, even some of the theaters aren't doing that hot, so, like, you know what I'm saying? I always thought it was kind of silly, like, "Oh, I got my film in a random local theater for, like, a week, and that was my theatrical run, and now I can go get an award." I'm like, that counts, really?" You know? Like,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know, I guess if you can get on a streaming platform, that should count as a major international, release, right? I would think.
yeah. I mean, I think it shouldn't matter anymore. But this has nothing to do with that, because that's a discussion for the awards, institutions, the academies and what have you.
Mhm.
They're the ones who decide what qualifies for a Oscar and what qualifies for an Emmy and vice versa. And it has nothing to do with how much they're paid. So, but this is specifically about how much you're paid, regardless of where it streams theatrically, or, to a writer, it's a movie, where,
Yeah.
because a lot of times, low budget films get made into theatrical releases and high budget films only get released online. It can be either way.
Now wait, when you say compensation, do you mean their initial fees for writing it, or are you talking about, like, back end stuff based on, like, ticket sales or
No,
viewership or something like that?
no, this is all based on just how much you're paid for the script.
Oh, okay.
And obviously, if you have a spec script, it's whatever that's negotiated versus, if you're hired. This is I think more of if you're hired to do a script,
Oh,
because
okay.
that's what the MBA is about, is, we're going to hire you to write this film, you know well, is it for streaming or for a theatrical? It's like, you pay me based on the budget of the film, or the venue it's being released on.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they're doing that, because we talked about, the back end is disappearing for films that don't go to theatric,
Mhm.
unless, like you talked about just a few minutes ago, if that data is available to talk about how many people are watching it, especially now that a lot of the streamers are going ad supported, or at least having ad supported tiers. You have to start calculating that. So if there are going to be ads during the film, how is the writer compensated based on that, just like as if they were doing a TV show.
Ah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Streamers are
Hmm.
becoming just like broadcast TV. Now, here's a question, and it's fine if you're like, "I don't know what this is." I wasn't sure what they meant in this, what they meant by this in the article. The Guild further states that it seeks to address the abuses of mini rooms. What is a mini room?
Yeah, that's the first I've kind of heard of it. Yeah, they want to set. It's about the size of the staff in the room. I guess on some of these smaller, shorter seasons, they're not necessarily smaller shows, because they could be very big
Mhm.
shows with short seasons. They may be understaffing the writers and just having the writers do more work, as opposed to having, I don't know if there's a formula for like number of episodes, divided by X equals number of writers you have to have. I don't know how that works, but I feel like that's probably what it's about.
Oh, interesting. That would be definitely something to look into because, I mean, I never thought that there were minimums that you had to have. I mean, obviously, like, the more people you have, you know, the more you can get things done, but I didn't think that it was like I guess I'm assuming you just hire the best people for the job, and it doesn't matter how many people are in the room, whether it's 5 or 15, kind of thing.
Well, you've been in a room with some of your recent work, so you kind of know what it's like to be in a room and however many episodes you're doing and how much work is put on each person. How do you feel like the load is, and how do you feel like there's enough writers? Do you not feel like there's enough writers?
Well, okay, so to be fair, there were 4 of us to start, there's 3 now, and I don't think it's a matter of load, I think it's a matter of deadline, honestly. I
Right.
never feel like, "Oh my gosh, we're not, there's too much pressure on me," because our deadlines are very fair and it's not like I have to I guess let me put it like this, my deadline to write a script is not the same as the deadline for when the project is actually gonna be completed. Like, if it was like, "Okay, guys, we're writing 22 episodes and we're starting to film next week," that's one thing, you know? But because we're not doing that, it doesn't feel horrible to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand, but in like a broadcast situation where you've got 20 plus episodes a season,
Yeah,
the difference between 3 writers and 5 writers is a huge difference.
that's true. But then
Yeah.
again, the other thing too, though, I mean, and again, I can't speak to being in a broadcast room, but everybody has their strengths. So, I mean, like, I would assume that you're like, "Okay, Joe's really good at story, and Susie's really good at character, and you're really good at polish," and you know what I mean? Like, I would assume you'd play to their strengths and not have 5 people who can only do one thing.
I don't know. I mean, I think in a room like that, you kinda have to be able to carry all the buckets in some
Mm,
cases. But the story editor or the showrunner is gonna review everything, and they oftentimes they do the polishing because they're the ones who are responsible for, like, the overall tone and voice. You wanna have writers who can stick to the tone and voice of the episodes of the shows, but it's really the showrunner who's responsible for making sure that they know it and that they make sure it gets translated in the final, script.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Huh. Yeah,
yeah,
I'd be curious to know what is a mini room and what are the abuses, because that to me is very vague, and it was the first time, just like for you, that I was like, "Oh, I didn't know this was going on, okay," you know?
yeah. The last couple things on the money side would be comedy and variety work. You write some comedy stuff
Mhm.
in new media specifically. So writing stuff for YouTube and streaming and TikTok and that kind of stuff they want to add to the minimum basic agreement payment for those kinds of things. For skit writing, I guess. So I don't know if they ever had something like that, or if you were a writer on like an SNL. Obviously, that would be different than if you're writing for a YouTube channel kind of thing.
Well, okay, first of all, we gotta stop calling it new media. It hasn't been new for quite some time.
Good,
It
true,
is
good point.
it is just online media at this point. I guess you'd have to ask, where is it originating? Because, for example, SNL originates in broadcast, and they just happen to put their sketches up online later. So they could probably get royalties for being on YouTube, but they're not gonna get additional money, right, for writing the script,
Hmm.
as opposed to I'm trying to think of, gosh, what's even out there anymore comedy-wise, like Smosh. I don't even know if Smosh is still around, I don't think they are, but,
I don't know either.
something like that, that, was known for, sketch writing versus because the other thing too is a lot of YouTube is reality TV. Like, if you had to break it down, what
Hmm.
online stuff is, it's either scripted or it's reality, it's still the
Yeah.
same
I
things.
see a lot less scripted YouTube things, even the animated kind of stuff. It is all usually reflective of current events or media
Mhm.
or movies and stuff.
There's it's funny, this is kind of a bit of a side tangent, but it does kind of actually go a little bit into, what I'm working on right now, Punch and Roll, which is the, uh, tabletop role playing live stream that I work on every other Wednesday. And it's funny because we were talking about we repurposed some of the YouTube live shows for like TikTok and Instagram and stuff. And the people on the show have also begun doing little sketches, and the sketches perform a lot better. And YouTube, I mean, I know this is kind of how I use it. A lot of times I use it as reality TV, like how-tos or, current events or a deep dive into a certain topic. I very rarely watch it for scripted stuff. And when we were talking about the sketches for Punch and Roll, somebody made a comment about like, "Oh my gosh, do I have to be like full makeup and costume, blah blah." And I'm like, "It'd be fun." But honestly, the whole point of social media like TikTok and stuff, it doesn't have to be super polished. It's kind of more fun if you do make a little mistake or your wig is a little off, or you know what I'm saying? As
Hmm.
opposed to broadcast or streaming where it's super polished comedy, great writing, someone's looked it over 50 million times, that sort of thing. But social media, the whole point of it is you kind of want it to look raw.
Hmm.
I don't know. But then if you do that, like, how do you get compensated? You know what I'm saying? It's like a this is a bit of a rabbit hole here, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that's a whole the whole social media content kind of thing is it's really dependent on the creator to like figure out their own monetization at that point.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's not regulated from there's no social. I mean, we've talked about them trying to get some influencers into the union and having agents and stuff like that. But as far as just day in day out content creators, they're on their own as far as how am I going to monetize this. Even
And
the main platforms, YouTube or TikTok or Twitch, won't compensate you enough to survive on alone. All of these
yeah,
guys have to do multiple things, and they have to get the endorsements, and they have to get the sponsors, and they have to get the all those sorts of things sponsored, even sponsored videos or sponsored posts.
yeah. But interestingly enough, kind of circling back, SAG-AFTRA is the only union that has actively pursued content creators, and again, there's a threshold to be part of their union. Writers Guild has not, Directors Guild has not, Producers Guild has not, but when you are a content creator, you wear all those hats.
Right.
So,
WGA has a new media membership function, but it's really focused on scripted, new media.
yeah.
Yeah,
I was
it's
gonna
not.
say it's not for, like, a little TikTok dance or
Yeah,
something. It's not meant for
no.
that. Yeah.
Back into the writers' room for a second.
Mhm.
One interesting thing I saw was that they have a thing about staff writer and story editor tenure that I thought was interesting. How long can a writer be in one of those positions? Like before you move up, like you can be a staff writer for so long or a story editor for so long before you get to move up into I don't know if it's a producer role or a showrunner role, that kind of thing.
Wow, I'm looking at the article right now. Wait, where is that? Or is that something separate?
No, it was in the article.
Huh. I'm looking
Let's
at it right
see.
now. But anyway, carry on. So, tenure as a certain position. I don't know if there ever really was a
I think it was in a different article. Actually, was the thing.
I mean, it's not like when you're in a writer's room that like well, I mean, in any field now, it's not like the whole I started in the mailroom and now I'm the CEO type thing. But
Yeah,
a lot of times I felt like if you tier jumped, it was because you jumped programs. Like, "Oh, I started out as an assistant on, this show, and now I'm a full-fledged writer on this show, and now I'm a showrunner on this show." But it's not necessarily a vertical progression, it's more like a jumping horizontal kind of zigzaggy, if
yeah.
you know what I'm saying.
Mhm.
That's how I've always thought that it works. So they're saying within a certain show?
Yeah, there was actually another article on negotiations, and they said that they were discussing setting limits on how long a TV scribe, they called it, can be
Mhm.
kept in the roles of staff writer or story editor. They say with the increasing number of increasing budgets, they should have a minimum number of weeks that you have on employment, but you shouldn't be stuck in that role for too long before you get to
Mhm.
move up. I mean, I guess it depends on how many seasons your show goes. it's not like the studio is hiring the writer, it's the show that's hiring the writer. So I feel like that's kind of hard to say because you could be a staff writer on one show and then go to a different show and be a staff writer. And I don't know if that all that staff writing becomes accumulative or not. Like if you go to another show, do they have to make you a story editor? And then after you do that for, if because there's a lot of shows that have been canceled after one season lately. It's like a
Yeah.
really high percentage are getting canceled these days. Even shows that are really good. I think I just saw something that said Wednesday from Netflix was going to get canceled, but I haven't confirmed that
Really?
yet.
I
Yeah, I
thought it
know it
was
was such
picked
a
up for
hit.
I thought they had picked it up for a second season.
I did too,
Seriously?
but then
Are you sure?
I'm not positive. I had not confirmed.
Okay.
No, it might have been clickbait actually. Let me double check. I'll Google it again and see if it's no, I found it's renewed. So maybe that
Okay.
was
It was a different Wednesday.
maybe it was
It
a
was
different
Thursday.
Wednesday. I might it might have been clickbait. I don't know. It was like something at the bottom of an article of something I think I saw. In fact, I think it was on the Hollywood Reporter. It was like how at the bottom of the articles they have those kind of quasi ad
Oh,
slash
yeah, yeah.
articles. Might have been one of
Yeah.
those. But anyway, the idea is that there are a lot of shows that are getting canceled after one season. So if you're a staff writer on a show, that's great. But then you get, your show gets canceled every season. No matter how great your show is, it could get canceled, and you keep kind of resetting the clock, so to speak. If you're on the same show, like you're on CSI and you're on it for 7 years and you're still a staff writer, then that becomes an issue. Like, shouldn't we have moved him up yet?
Well, but then you have to argue, like, I mean, really the only difference is pay because if you're a staff writer, what's the next position beyond that? Showrunner? So does everybody become showrunners? Like 15 of you all graduate at the same time? Like, what is it? Just senior staff writer? Like, what's the next title beyond
Well,
that?
there's story editor. Yeah,
Okay, so
there's a
what's
story
beyond
editor,
story
and
editor?
so well, you can be an assistant. First of all, some people start as writing assistants or whatever, producer assistants,
Mhm.
but then you can go to a staff writer, then you can go to a story editor, then you get into things like co-producer and producers, which at some level in there, there's the showrunner is usually the executive producer, so there's a
Mhm.
supervising producer, co-executive producer. So there's a lot of levels in there, mostly in the producer level. So,
I
but
was
those
gonna
are all
say
still
though,
writers, though.
I mean, well, I don't know. I didn't know the producers also wrote.
Yeah. Oh no, the
Oh,
executive
okay.
producer is always usually the showrunner.
Yeah, but even they don't like write everything. That's why they have everyone else.
They're the ones reviewing all the scripts though,
Yeah.
and doing some rewriting.
But I guess my point is eventually you title out. There's only so far you can go
Right.
until you're the showrunner.
That's
You know
kind
what
of
I
the
mean?
top unless they're gonna run the studio. So,
Yeah, like I like that's what I'm saying. Like the only thing I can think of for the tier jumping is just to get more pay,
yeah. Well, executive
honestly.
producer is kind of a vague title anyway, because it can be the money, it can be the
Yeah, I was
guy who
gonna
owns the
say.
studio,
It could be
it
the
can
guy
be
running around doing all the things. Yeah,
and it could
producers
be
quite a lot.
the showrunner, right? I mean,
Yeah.
JJ Abrams is the executive producer on everything that Bad Robot does, but he doesn't write everything and he doesn't showrun everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but he is, he's involved in them. But yeah, see, there's a bunch of after story writer, you got story editor, then you get into co-producer and producer levels and stuff.
Mhm.
And it's just more responsibility, I think, at some of those levels where you're more like you're overseeing writers at that point and reviewing more. You're involved in more review level stuff. Anyway, so they just want to kind of like figure that out. But the interesting question there I have is like, is that based on the individual show or is it based on total work? Like if I've been a staff writer on two or three or four shows, does that mean I can't be a staff writer on another show and I have to be promoted to story editor?
I
You know what
mean,
I'm saying?
honestly, like okay, so I know, like, with the Writers Guild is a little different than some of, like, the crew guilds where like, the crew guilds, you have to log in X amount of hours on a union set before you can get your union card, depending on what type of, local it is. And I think with the Writers Guild, it's what, like, a theatrical release or X amount of hours in a TV show. So that's where I can see it counting. But
Hmm.
honestly, so basically the way you've just described it, in layman's terms, it's either like I'm an employee or I'm a manager. Well, some people don't wanna be managers. Some people just
Right.
wanna write. They don't necessarily wanna be bumped up to producer and have to do the other things. That
True.
would be my thought, you know?
Mhm.
Give them more
Yeah,
money, yes, for being there for a long time, but if they don't wanna be producer, I
right.
don't know, like, I'm just saying.
And there are people who wanna show run, but they don't wanna be the creator, that kinda thing too.
Mhm.
Like, and they're totally capable of running a show, but not being the one responsible for the, like, the idea kinda thing.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Would you I mean, random aside, would you want to be a showrunner for your own show or for something that somebody else came up with?
If it was someone else's show, I'd have to really be into the concept.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you'd have to really, I mean, obviously, you'd have to be on this totally 100% the same page as the creator.
Mhm. I don't know, I mean, I feel like I think before I would have been like, "Oh, no, I have to show run my own concept." But now after having been in a writer's room for close to a year now, I kind of also like being able to divorce myself from the property. Like,
Mhm.
if my boss has a change, I'm like, "Cool. In the end, it's your thing. I'm happy to do whatever you need me to do." You know? Whereas if it's your concept, you might be a little like, "No, don't touch it, it's my baby," you know? So, there is
Yeah.
something to be said about having that distance from it and still
Mhm.
being able to execute well. I don't know. It's an interesting thought.
Let's see. Last thing on my list is going to be the old standbys of they want to combat discrimination, harassment, and work towards pay equality. Those are kind of like, I think those are always be on every list of negotiating things because it still happens no matter how
Mhm.
much people want to say it doesn't.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's good.
So they've got a
That's
good
good.
list of priorities. It's a long list. My list is like, was it, a dozen items there? Which ones are they gonna like the one article said, the hill to die on? I don't know. It seems like there's a lot here that I don't know any of them that the studios can really argue with that much though. I mean, if I was a studio exec, you're always trying to do things, keep things under budget and stuff like that, but it's hard to justify not paying your writers more when you're spending 50 million or 100 million on a Lord of the Rings, series kind of thing.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I feel like honestly, I feel like the pay issue with the streaming and all that kind of goes hand in hand with the AI. Because if they're kind of like, "Oh, we don't wanna pay you more, and we'll use AI." You know what I mean? Whereas if they're like, "No, we're committed to the human writer, and
Yeah.
also we'll put ethics in around the new technology." I kind of
Yeah.
feel like those 2 really go together.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, if the studios just wanna say they don't wanna use writers anymore, then they don't need a contract, they could just use AI. But
Oh my
then but
gosh.
then no writers would work for that studio. It's like that studio would be blackballed, and at that point, you have to wonder, well, do the directors, do the producers, do the actors, stand with the writers at that perspective?
Mhm.
Yeah. It's
It'll
kinda
be
like
interesting.
when they start doing, production with all artificial characters, the voices, the motion. They don't even need to do the motion capture anymore. They just have the AI do the motion, the animation kind of stuff.
Mhm.
There's always
Maybe
an
they
there's
need to
always
come
another
up
human. There's always another human you can cut out of the equation, I guess.
I was gonna say maybe they need to come up with because right now I think kids don't wanna be astronauts or even movie stars, they wanna be content creators. So if you start going, "AI is moving into content creation," then everyone will be like, "No!" And Gen Z will be like, "No, we're putting our foot down. You're taking away our jobs of the future."
Right. Where do you draw the line, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is where the line is drawn by the WGA. We'll have to see what they put into their final you know, slate of requests when they go to negotiate.
We'll keep you guys informed. Follow
Yeah.
us online at writersgrouptherapy.com. You can find us online on Twitter and Instagram, and I think that's it for our social media, right?
Yeah.
At WG Therapy, and we will talk to you guys in a few weeks.